So what they say about the argument prompt is the goal is for students to construct a clear, rhetorically sound argument that supports an assertion with convincing evidence using a structure that advances the argument logically and persuasively. I don't know what stands out to you. If we were in class, we would discuss it. But here you can see they're looking for a rhetorically sound argument. That means rhetorically sound means that you have your own ability to use rhetorical skills and that you support an assertion. So you support a claim that you're making with convincing evidence, which means that you're going to have to do a little bit of research for this using a structure that advances the argument logically and persuasively. So the way that you craft your essay will be logical and persuasive in its structure. So features of all strong arguments, and a lot of this is covered in chapter 3, but I'll kind of hit the highlights. One is you're going to appeal. You're going to appeal to logos, ethos, or pathos, again, or multiple ones. Often good arguments have more than one appeal. You're going to make structural choices of whether or not you're going to do inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning. You're going to have a purpose. And, are you defining things in this? Are you evaluating things? Are you proposing things? And you're going to have some moves that you make, which means you're going to address some concessions and rebuttals. So you'll address some concerns from the other side and you'll rebuttal those. There are different types of evidence that we use when we're trying to craft clear and convincing evidence. One of those things are things like anecdotes, which are, of course, stories and observations. Things like facts and statistics, those you'll get from experts. You'll do a little bit of research to help you find that. Historical or literary examples. So this would be where you're pulling from your knowledge that you've gotten from APUSH or some other lit class that you've taken. Personal experience. Of course, that's hard to argue with sometimes because you've been through things, especially if you think about some of the essays that we've read, like Black Men in Public Space. Cultural and geographic evidence, science, and religion. So when you get a prompt or when you decide on a prompt, oftentimes we tell you to try to see it. And this acronym is to help you really expand your thinking. If I give you a prompt, which I'll do an example of in a second, when you see it, you try to think about big picture. Okay. So if you're making an argument about whether or not to go to a 4-day work week, whether or not to teach online versus teaching in person, right? All of those things are going to have elements that you have to think about. So the first S is actually a $sign and it means money. So you think about the funds and the jobs that would be affected by this particular decision. Safety is the second S. And you're looking again like health, overall well-being. It can be mental health. It can be physical health. Ethics would be your beliefs and values about what you think is important. The second E is environmental issues like natural, political, and social issues that would be affected by this particular choice that you're making. I would be international impact. Not every decision has an international impact, but if it does, you'd be thinking about how would this affect the global world. T is technology. What kind of technology would be required? What kind of technology would be used? What kind of technology needs to be created? And the last T is time. And you'll notice that it starts with money and it ends with time. And I always like to tell my students that everything at the end of the day comes down to money and time. There are several types of argument structures. There are 3 we're going to briefly go over, but these are all in your chapter 3 reading. The first one is the classical argument structure. And here you can see that these are 5 sections. These are not 5. This is not a 5-body paragraph. But as you start to write longer papers for college, you're going to notice that you're going to need to add that second part in there, that narration part, where you're going to give background information. You'll give background information on the problem. Basically, it's like rhetorical context, but maybe even about, if you're doing a psych paper, previous different types of psychology that was thought about prior to the one you're going to write about. So you're going to give background information, and the longer the paper, each of those could have a different section. So your background section could be 2 or 3 paragraphs, especially if you're doing a psych paper where you're talking about previously tried experiments. And you might give each of those experiments a paragraph where you talk about what the experiment entailed and its outcome. Confirmation are going to be your arguments. And these, again, can be several paragraphs. And we're going to talk about how to brainstorm that in a little bit. But here you can see, as far as confirmation goes, it's as many paragraphs as many arguments as you can make. So as many claims as you can make is how many paragraphs you'll have. The refutation section is where you're talking about counter arguments. And the peroration or conclusion is your last section. And that, of course, is where you kind of bring it all back together. Your Rogerian argument is going to be this structure. It's definitely more contemporary and more like non-confrontational. So you're looking at the introduction where you're kind of describing the issue and you're demonstrating a respect for alternative positions. Then you're going to go into context where you're going to describe different contexts in which alternative positions are valid. And then you're going to go into your position where your position is the most valid because of the specific situation we're in. And then the benefits. So you're explaining how everybody would benefit from your adoption based off of how the specific situation kind of plays out. Toolman is a tool for shaping your arguments, and it's just kind of having some words that or phrases that help you understand what kinds of things you'd be doing in your argument. So obviously for your claim, you need to have something that is debatable. Like you can't have a claim like everybody should, have everybody should have preschool. That's kind of a given. The reason that people don't is because of money, but everybody should have preschool. So, evidence, reasons, or examples from a variety of sources. So when we're talking about evidence, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that stuff that we can find elsewhere that would support what you're claiming. A warrant is used to justify it. So that's just the logic that you have. Warrants are like givens. What naturally happens, what usually happens. So usually when students do their homework, they have better grades in class. That's kind of a given, but it helps justify a claim. Qualifiers are going to be when you're trying to limit a claim. So you're saying, nearly everyone believes this. So then nearly instead of just everyone, you're kind of limiting the group. And your conditions for your rebuttal are going to be addressing potential objections, alternative viewpoints. Just when you're thinking about evidence, you need to consider your audience. You're composing an effective argument, and you're really trying to help people who don't believe in your argument to believe your argument. So you have to think about what those people consider as valid sources, what those people would consider arguments that are valid. And that's what you're trying to think about. If you think about your own parents, right, when you're making an argument with your parents, I know that my mother was always, when I was a child or even a college, high school student, was concerned about my safety. And so whenever I would make an argument about me being someplace that she doesn't know or doesn't recognize, I would have to justify the safety. And so just consider that kind of stuff as you are creating your argument. Think about the other side, because that is what a big part of what your argument will be. So there are some examples of these arguments in your textbook. And so that you can pause and take a look at if you want to look a little bit more into it. We're going to be focusing on the classical form. Okay, we're going to take a break here, and I will talk about metaphors for invention next, but just in case you need to go do something. See you soon.